Dana, you've been on the other side. You've been on the rapper as a press secretary interviewing a president. And, you know, I'm talking like 4 people waving their hands like it's got to stop. I had to dismount there at the end.
Had to dismount is like he's an Olympic gymnast on the balance beam. Had to do a dismount there because there were 4 or 5 talking to Dana Perino, former White House press secretary. He's like, yeah, you've been there. Shut it down. Stop. Make it stop. You got to stop it. Stop asking questions. Yes, sir. Well, happy Thursday to you and welcome. Welcome back. Just talking to Jasmine, our producer, on phones today. And she said people are weighing in and say, you know, no reporters ever asked Kamala about the staff people that have all resigned from her office since she got the big job. More than 90% of her staffers have resigned, stepped away. And these, in theory, should be really desirable jobs. I work in the office of the Vice President of the United States. I'm a communications director, or deputy director, or whatever you are. A nice title. You get a fancy business card. It's got a little government seal on it, you know, a gold eagle clutching, arrows and one talon and leaves and another. It's all very nice. The olive branch, because, you know, you get these cool business cards and a great job title, and then you're supposed to get a better job later. But more than 90% of her staff have resigned. And the inside reporting, the news media doesn't report on it much because they're the tongue bath media, but it's because she's so awful and horrible to work for that nobody likes her. So they all flee, even though, you know, a lot of people have tough bosses, right? And you may not like your boss. That's a real world thing. You may not like the company you work for. You work in the government, blah, blah. But more than 90% fleeing like the place is on fire. Well, you know, we've talked about this in the past. She, in the building where the vice president's office is, across from the White House, it's a tallish building, and they had to put nets down around the first floor because so many of her staffers were hurling themselves from high floors. Wah! They put bounce houses that, you know, like have kids' parties because so many of her staff were defenestrating, I think is the correct word. Is that? Yeah, it is. It is. Also, I mentioned that Joe Biden whipped out the B-2 stealth bombers yesterday to fly from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri to Yemen in order to drop big bombs on the Houthi rebels and blow up Houthi rebels and kill them. And they have these underground, because they're all underground, all these rats like the Hamas people with their tunnel systems in Gaza and the Hezbollah people in Lebanon. Turns out they've got a tunnel system there bigger than the Hamas tunnel system. And turns out that the subterranean rats in Yemen, the Houthi rebels, they also have lots of underground stuff. Well, they did until the B-2 bombers flew overhead and dropped some. I bet that Kamala okayed the 2,000-pound bombs for that. What do you think? Won't give the 2,000-pound bombs to Israel, but I bet we're using the 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs to blow up the underground facilities of the Houthis in Yemen. But were it not for double standards, liberals would have no standards at all, right? Amazing stuff. So the B-2 bombers whipped out the B-2, you know, the really cool stealth bombers, bat-wing bombers, the big ones. And they have to fly a long way from Whiteman to go to Yemen to drop bombs and then turn around and you got to fly back to Whiteman. You can't stop for gas just anywhere when you have a B-2 bomber. So that's pretty remarkable stuff. And they have a 2-man crew. The B-2 stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, has a 2-man crew. And originally it was going to have a bigger crew, like a 5-man crew, but it's a 2-man crew, and sitting side by side. And because they have these long missions, there's a space behind where the 2 crew sit in the front, of course, side by side. there's a space behind that where they get 888 lawn chairs from Best Buy, and they put them back there, and they take turns going back and taking naps, sleeping a little bit for the very long flights that they take. This is true. I know because in my previous life, I found myself in the cockpit of a B-2 bomber one day, and it's like, hey, a lot of space, but hey, wait a minute, what's that? That's a folding lawn chair. Oh, yeah, well, we don't typically bomb Indiana. We fly great distances like to Bosnia and drop bombs. And so we take turns taking naps, put a lawn chair back there. Kind of a fun little side story. It's a true story on B-2 bombers. They have these lawn chairs. And so where'd you get it? So we went down to, to Target or Best Buy or whatever it was. And it was $888. Got it on sale. Folds up back there. And when it's time to nap, we take turns going back and snooze a little, then come back up here, drop some bombs on, on Houthis, and then go home. Calling them Houthis is kind of a fun name for people you're blowing up, isn't it? The Houthis. Houthis. Yeah, I want to sing Tootsie goodbye, like Houthi goodbye. But that goes back to the Rwanda thing. Remember with the Tutsis and the Hutu and the Tutsis. And, if you, the device I use to remember which side was attacking which is the Hutu were attacking the Tutsis, and they murdered about 1 million of them using a lot of machetes and stuff. It was terrible. But it was like, which side was killing which side? And I always remember by saying, Tutsi, goodbye. Right? Tutsi, don't cry. That's how you remember that it was the Tutsis that were being murdered, right? And they were the targets by the Hutu. The Houthis made me think of the Hutu. I like to keep notes on these things. I got a little notepad. Got a little notepad. All right, but I digress. Now, also, since we're talking about Joe Biden using the B-2 stealth bombers to drop bombs on Houthis in Yemen, it turns out right now, even as we speak in Israel, they're trying to figure out for sure whether they've killed the leader of Hamas, whose name is Yahya Sinwar, either is or was Yahya Sinwar. And he's the leader of Hamas, which is a dangerous job. It's a dangerous job because you're waging war against a culture that's far superior to yours. And once you start murdering people in Israel, they're going to say, hey, wait a minute, who's doing that? They're going to say, oh, that's Yahya Sinwar of Hamas. And then Yahya Sinwar's life is worth, isn't worth a shekel. It's not worth 2 rupees. So it looks like, and they say they've got DNA, so they got a piece of him. And they say they have DNA, they're 99% sure, but they're not 100% sure, so they might have to drop another bomb on the house where he hangs out. And but Kamala won't let him have the 2,000-pound bombs because, you know how they are. All right, I have digressed sufficiently. Now let me get to the interview. Brett Baer with Kamala Harris, and I want to start with Uncle Fester from CNN. They fired him like a year and a half ago, and then they hired Uncle Fester back, right? Brian Seltzer-water. And Brian Seltzer-water was on CNN this morning giving his opinion. He's their media Hutu. I think he's their media Houthi. And he was on the CNN TV this morning talking about the debate. He called it a debate. Talking about the interview last night, Brett Baer with Kamala Harris. And he's just another Democrat bootlick. And he works for CNN, which is the right place for him to be.
I think Trump refused to debate Kamala Harris again, so Harris did the next best thing. She booked a debate on Fox News. And that's what this was tonight. She essentially walked into a Trump campaign field office because anchor Brett Baer, who is a solid journalist, he is also incredibly sympathetic to Trump because that's what his fans want. That's what his viewers want. His viewers want him to represent the Trump point of view. So it was almost as if you had a Trump surrogate interviewing Kamala Harris.
That's projection. That's what psychologists and psychiatrists would call projection, because he's like, well, this is what I do. I'm a Democrat Party advocate, so surely at Fox News they must be Trump sycophants. He asked the questions that everyone wants answered. And you frauds, you bootlicks, won't ask those questions. And so, Brett Baier, it was about the economy and the border. The border and the economy. It's what these are the issues most important to the American people. And those were the questions asked. And these clowns at CNN, the Brian Seltzer-waters, the Uncle Festers of the world, a.k.a. Humpty Dumpty, he sees it through the prism of the Democrat Party.
Adversarial interviews are a good thing. We should root for them. We should want more of them. You know, you're so fantastic at adversarial interviews where we challenge newsmakers and we get answers out of them.
What?
But yes, this was a Rorschach test. Some people think Baier was mansplaining. Other people think Harris is filibustering. I think at the end of the day, this was all about one word, the word tough. It showed that Harris was tough. She went into the so-called Fox den, and that's how Harris's campaign is promoting it tonight. They're saying she went into the Fox den and look what happened.
Yeah, she didn't answer a damn question. She was rude, sophomoric, immature, didn't answer a single question to anyone's satisfaction, and then gets a tongue bath from this clown, Seltzer-water, who, again, is projecting. And it reminded me of a soundbite that we play from time to time of Victoria Nuland, who was a State Department official in the Obama-Biden administration, who revealed what the Democrats do all the time, including the media.
It is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Yes. And you say, oh, well, Brett Baier must be a political advocate. Therefore, it's okay for me to be a political advocate. It's a rationalization of sorts. Just amazing. Appalling. Yeah, the Russian playbook, Russian tradecraft. It's really Soviet that she's talking about. Amazing stuff. All right, let me start with a bit of what we got from Kamala not answering questions last night. And again, the economy. These are the most important issues to the American people: the economy and your open border with all the gangs and the child sex trafficking, which is at an all-time high because of the Democrats but they like child sex trafficking. It's like Blazing Saddles, you know. So here's Brett Baier saying, you know, the polls show that the American people trust Donald Trump on the economy and not you.
Why do you think more people say they trust him on the economy than they trust you?
I think that when you look at an analysis of our plans for what we would do as President of the United States, it has been clear to those who study and understand how economic policy works that moving forward, because I do believe the American people are ready to turn the page on the divisiveness and the type of rhetoric that has come out of Donald Trump.
What? I'm sorry, and Brett Baier is kind of shaking his head and he's looking around. He's like, did I ask a question back there having to do with the polls and why people? What are you talking about now? And then Brett Baier pointed something out because there's a song, Turn the Page, and this is what they're running on. But you have been in control for the last 4 years and say, what we need to flush and start over again.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other.
It's deplorable. It really is. It's deplorable. And all the fascist, Nazi, threat to democracy, that kind of rhetoric. It's mean tweets. They're still... Past decade, he hasn't been in charge for the last 4 years. I don't know if you noticed, but you guys have actually been the ones in charge. And turning the page means getting away from you, doesn't it? But this is too complex. She has the brain of a high school girl, a not very bright high school girl. You know that an unforgettable meal brings people together. Maybe not in Washington, but in normal places. And nothing makes a meal unforgettable like the unrivaled quality, the mouth-watering taste of Omaha steaks. Omaha Steaks. Taste the difference, and right now save 50% off the entire Omaha Steaks website with their semi-annual sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, because you hang out with me, you're going to get another $30 off using the code PLANT, P-L-A-N-T-E. There's an E on the end. No one knows why. Their legendary steaks are selected from the finest grain-finished beef for superior marbling, and then they're hand-cut by master butchers in Middle America, America's heartland. And then each and every steak is flash frozen at the moment of carving so they can maintain their rich, juicy flavor. And you get to save 50% off the entire website on mouth-watering steaks and a whole lot more during the semi-annual sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, because you're hanging out here, another $30 off with the code PLANT. That's 50% savings plus an extra $30 off at omahasteaks.com with the code PLANT. Minimum purchase may apply. Visit omahasteaks.com for details. Yes, sir. Yeah, Kamala. She doesn't have to. No, Trump. Well, what about the border? Well, Trump. Well, what about, hey, nice outfit you have on? Trump. We're at 888-630-9625. That coming up, and President Trump as well, plus the FBI lying to us about crime in America. Big liars that they are. Yeah, Brett Baer asked Kamala, when did you notice that Joe Biden's brain was dead? And she said, Trump. I'm sorry, what? Got that coming up. And our corrupt news media, filthy, they have communists there, too. Yeah, at least one actual communist to talk about. Let's go to the telephones now. Let's go to Malcolm, calling from Frederick, Maryland. Malcolm, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Hey, Chris, how are you doing?
Just great, buddy. What do you say?
I'm great. Hey, I just want to say two things. Last night I thought Brett Baer did a pretty good job of trying to hold the filibuster at bay, but I still think that Kamala did quite a bit of filibustering going on. But the most important thing I wanted to say is, Kamala said that she's not President Biden and she's not going to continue his policies. But what she didn't say was that her policies are going to be 50 times worse than Biden's policies.
Yeah, she would be disinclined to tell the truth in that regard, wouldn't she?
I would say. I mean, that would probably put everybody in a tizzy, but that was my main observation of last night. I mean, it's a mess, that's for sure.
Well, you're right. It's like, it's like I always say, Malcolm, Barack Obama promised the fundamental transformation of America. He didn't say it was going to be for the better. Nobody asked him the follow-up question. And you're right, Kamala didn't say it was going to be better, just said it wasn't going to be Biden. Ah, yes. All right, we have more Kamala and Brett Baer. The news media is like, it's like going into the fox's den. He asked questions and didn't get answers, of course. Because Democrats don't believe they have to answer to anyone. They're the left, un-American, not liberals, leftists, arrogant, and with good reason, because they get away with murder. Just ask Ted Kennedy. Did you see the Chinese yesterday? Where's that? Did you send me that? The Chinese put out a kind of an amphibious car. They announced yesterday the Chinese communists, they're communists. And they say, we've got a car that swims. The Nazis had a car that swims, too. It was called the Schwimmenwagen. I didn't make that up. That's true. They had the Volkswagen, which we still have, the Volkswagen. It was the Beetle, and Adolf Hitler of his Socialist Workers' Party. He was in on designing that. They had the Volkswagen. And they had the Kubelwagen, That's where the Kubels drove. And they had the Schwimmenwagen. Because it was amphibious, it would go schwimmen. And the Chinese, they announced yesterday they've got a new amphibious, did you just find it? A new amphibious vehicle. And a friend of mine sent it to me yesterday and said, too bad Ted Kennedy didn't have this car in the day because, you still got to take shots at Ted Kennedy. right? On behalf of the Kopechne family, you got to do that. Yeah, swimming car, but is it green? Is it electric? It's electric. Bum, 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 ba-dum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Let's go to the telephones. I see on the line someone that called in yesterday when we were talking to Mike the Lib. Let's go to John calling from Haymarket, Virginia. John, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can.
Okay. Yeah, so this is in regards to your caller yesterday. So he had quoted some numbers as to the number of non-citizen registrations that were removed from the voting rolls. He was actually quoting my work.
Well, before you proceed, let me just hit refresh. Mike the Lib called in yesterday, and he has, as you might imagine, a lib, and he spends a lot of time at election time at polling places and stuff. And Mike the Lib called in, and Mike the Lib was spewing a bunch of numbers about the number of people voting, and he's accusing Republicans of voter corruption because, that's what they do. And then I called him Hitler. I don't think I did call him Hitler, but it's just this is what the conversation with the Democrat looks like. But you were listening, and you said, well, wait a minute. He's citing my numbers, and he's misrepresenting my numbers, and that's why you're on the line now.
Yes. So I'm the CTO and Executive Director of the Electoral Process Education Corporation. We are a 501c3, nonpartisan. We encourage voter participation. We also take a look at election data. We take a look at all the processes, et cetera. We put out, poll watcher forms, et cetera, and those types of things. So one of the analyses that we did, starting back in March of this year, we started taking a look at the data that we are getting from the Department of Elections. And that data tells us when they remove somebody for being a non-citizen. So I went through and I collated all of the removal message, all the transaction logs that were removals, and then I collated those and correlated them with the voter history information to go say, okay, of these people that were removed because they had self-identified as non-citizens, did they vote? How many numbers did they vote, et cetera? And we've been tracking that, pretty much every month now when we get our data. I put up an update for that. So he was quoting that number, and he was misrepresenting what is actually going on at the Department of Elections. The Department of Elections has a regular standard maintenance program that goes through, and whenever somebody self-identifies, either through interaction with the DMV or a jury duty questionnaire or something along those lines, where they are submitting a legal document to the state under penalty of perjury, on that document, they can say whether or not they're a citizen. So, for example, if somebody goes into the DMV, they use the kiosk, there's a question that pops up, are you a citizen? And if they say no, the DMV looks up their record and sees that there is a record in the Department of Elections. They send over that information to the Department of Elections. The Department of Elections will then remove that person and put that registration and put them into a pending category. And this
is what's happening in Virginia right now, because Governor Youngkin and Jason Miyares, the Attorney General, are advancing an effort to cleanse the voter rolls of non-citizens that are registered to vote in the state of Virginia. And that's where the Mike the Lib conversation started yesterday, right?
Yeah, and so that program has been going on before Youngkin. That right. Program was put in place a long time ago. Youngkin's executive order really just kind of publicized the fact that this is how things are operating. It didn't change much, but it did do a lot of visibility and publication as to here's what the process.
And John, I should say, and the Biden Justice Department under Merrick Garland is now suing the state of Virginia to try to prevent them from removing non-citizens from the voter rolls.
Yeah, and the crux of there's two parts to the crux of their argument. So part one is they're saying that, oh my gosh, it's 90 days before an election and there's this big quote unquote purge that has happened. Well, that's not true. This has been an ongoing program. This happens routinely on a day-by-day basis. There are some of those registrants that got removed over that 2-year period, so that Youngkin and AG Miyares made a publication and a statement that 6,000 people were removed over a 2-year period.
Right.
So yes, some of them might have been within that 90-day window, but the vast majority of them happened, kind of over a day-to-day process over those 2 years.
Right.
So
but they want to stop you.
fallacy.
They want to stop Virginia from doing it now that they're within 90 days of the election, right?
Yes, and so the second, kind of fallacy of their argument is the 90-day quiet period window in NVRA was intended such that if somebody is a valid legal voter and they are on the voter rolls, that they don't have a sudden change in their registration at the last minute. It was not intended for invalid registrations, things that are incorrect from jump, that have never been a valid registration. Somebody being a non-citizen would have never been a valid registration. That would have been an error that needed to be corrected. And there is a exclusion clause in NVRA Section 8 that says errors can be corrected at any time, and they are not applicable to the quiet period.
And also, since you can, and I need to get back to my interview here, since you can register to vote within 90 days of Election Day, obviously, and I don't know if you can register on Election Day in Virginia, but you can in a lot of places, and the Democrats want to find it, ways to make it as loose as possible to vote. Since you can register within 90 days, you have to keep looking at who's registering to make sure that you don't have non-citizens, since the Democrats have just imported millions and millions of illegal aliens. They're fond of winning elections. They don't care if they're legitimate or not.
Yeah, so in Virginia, we do have same-day voter registration.
Right.
The regular registration period closed yesterday, but you can still do a same-day registration, and you would end up voting a provisional ballot.
Right. Okay, John, listen, I'm glad that you called back in. I'm glad you got on to explain this hooey that the Democrats are peddling, and the news media is peddling it, but that's because the Democrats are peddling it. And if you want to have clean voter rolls, the Democrats will oppose you at every turn. And the Justice Department, under corrupt Merrick Garland, who's still bitter about not being on the Supreme Court, will take you to court and sue you. It's not his money, and he's got buildings full of lawyers. So they'll sue everybody and sue anybody to try to make it easier to cheat on Election Day. The Democrats want it to be easier to cheat on Election Day, and Republicans would like to make it easy to vote and difficult to cheat. And that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you letting me come on and clarify those statistics.
You bet. Thanks, John, and thanks for doing the Lord's work and trying to keep us honest as a nation. Now let's get back to Brett Baier and Kamala from yesterday. The Brett Baier, he asked, "Hey, when did you notice that Joe Biden's brain was dying inside of his skull case? Was that recent, or that happened a long time ago?"
When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden.
Listen to this.
I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room.
He's a genius.
And he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
There were no concerns raised?
Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
Now, Joe Biden is not on the ballot. That's not really related to the question that I asked. I asked a question about when you noticed. Have you noticed? Are you too dim of wit to notice that Joe Biden's brain, she's a no good? She's a broke. That's the brain of his. It's a no good. And Brett, and the arrogance of power, the filibuster. She interrupted him and the news media constantly and talked over him. He couldn't get a full question out without her jumping in to interrupt him because she's rude and petulant. And I hope Doug Emhoff doesn't see her behaving like that, because you know how Doug Emhoff responds when he sees women behaving like, hey, we're not at the Cannes Film Festival. So Brett Baier said she was already asked this once previously, and she gave a lame-brained answer. So he said, you become president of the United States. would you do anything differently than Joe Biden? You know, would you still leave the borders open and the next Rachel Morin would be raped and murdered, and you'd have more gangs coming in, and there'd be more war in the Middle East, and you'd be using B-2 bombers to bomb Yemen, and there'd be more war in Europe? I mean, you wouldn't do anything differently? We had 9% inflation. We got to $5 a gallon gasoline. Would you do anything differently? There are gangs taking over apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and the media and Democrats, but I repeat myself, lying about it. So Brett Baier asked this.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes in to office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership.
Yeah, but what was the question? And that's, I believe, what Malcolm was talking about, our caller a few minutes ago, saying that she filibustered her way through, and, you know, Brett Baier did a pretty good job. But what is this? Okay, you're not going to be Joe Biden, but what are you going to be? What would you do differently? And we still don't know because it was a non-answer. Honestly, it won't be a continuation of Joe Biden. But as Malcolm was saying, yeah, it'll be worse. You know, nobody's asked her, okay, so will it be? Again, refer you to Barack Obama, the fundamental transformation of America. He didn't say it was going to fundamentally transform America for the better. He just said, you know, I have power. I'm going to abuse the hell out of it because I was mentored by a communist, and I hired a communist to be the CIA director and stuff.
We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
Woo! And the crowd goes wild because they can't wait to fundamentally transform the United States. They're going to turn it into Yemen, but never mind that. Actually, remember the story I shared with you here about a family that were relocated by the United Nations or something from Yemen to San Francisco. And they spent about 6 months in San Francisco, and they were so terrified, they moved back to Yemen. Their daughter couldn't walk to school. Mom couldn't walk down the street. And they were like, oh, my God, is this the United States? Like, well, it's San Francisco. And like, I'd rather be in Sana'a. And they moved back to Yemen. So Brett Baier pointed out that the polls are not going very well in terms of the country being on the right track.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
What?
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
What?
You and I both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
I actually don't. What are you talking about? That was a good moment, I thought. So, no, wait a minute. 79% say we're on the wrong track. You guys have been, your administration is almost over. Oh, Donald Trump, you know, we both know what I'm talking about. He's like, no, I actually don't know what you're talking about because I have, functional cerebellum. And therefore, as a normal person, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Come
Isn't
on.
that amazing?
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
So 79% of Americans say we're on the wrong track as a nation. Oh, yeah. Well, Trump. And again, this happened with Obama. It happens with the filthy, rotten, lying Sacagawea Democrats all the time. They never take adult responsibility for anything. It doesn't matter for how long they're in charge. It's never on them. Their own policies never come home to roost because the news media never asks them about it. And it's like, hey, murder rate's up. Good job. Well, we're going to tell everyone that the murder rate's down, and we're going to put the imprimatur of the FBI on it. And when we tell all the news media that the FBI says the murder rate is down and violent crime is down, everyone will believe us. And when we get caught lying, we'll attack everyone and accuse them of being Hitler or something. because that's the standard protocol. And I do have the FBI lied to us about violent crime and murder story coming up, too, because they've been caught again.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on the ballot.
Yeah, and it does look like the head of Hezbollah, Sinwar, was killed in a strike by the Israelis. And it's a terrorist army, a genocidal death cult of a terrorist army. So naturally, the Democrats are at best ambivalent about it because they're not on our side. They're just not on our side. Kind of a problem. And yesterday, the Israeli media was reporting that the senior leadership of Hezbollah has been eliminated, has been wiped out. The army of Allah, Hezbollah. And that would be a good thing for civilization. But the left is not on the side of civilization. Civilization is not their bag, honestly. So that's good stuff. And, we're in a state of war. When President Trump was in the White House, Israel struck peace agreements with 3 different Arab nations. And then Joe Biden and the Democrats came in, and now we're bringing out the B-2 bombers to bomb Yemen and sending anti-missile systems over to Israel and 100 troops, putting them in a combat zone. We're in the midst of a war because the Democrats somehow are good at bringing about war. Only if you count the American Civil War and World War I and World War II and the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Other than that, they've got a pretty good record of keeping us out of war. But I don't want to pick nits. Now, they started the American Civil War. They didn't start World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, but they did get us into World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War under their leadership, And they put all the Japanese and Japanese Americans into concentration camps, prison camps. Now they're concerned that Donald Trump will kick illegal aliens out of the country, particularly focused on gang members. But the Democrats don't want that, do they? Heck no. And I've got more coming up, and President Trump, too. And President Trump made reference to January 6th and Ashley Babbitt being killed, and that infuriated the news media because they're still peddling a fiction.